History often celebrates admirals and battleships, but sometimes it forgets the ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. On December 7, 1941, during a moment of crisis at Pearl Harbor, one sailor refused to abandon 6 trapped crewmen on a nearby ship. He went against orders and saved their lives, yet for more than 70 years, his name disappeared from the records. This is the story of Joseph George, the silent hero the world almost forgot. Joseph Leon George wasn't known for medals or ranks. He was known as a tough, hard-working sailor. A man who fixed ships, handled ropes, and kept the deck running. He was what you'd call a bosun's mate, a job that required grit and practical skill, not a fancy title. He'd been in the Navy for years, and by 1941, he was serving on the USS Vestal, a repair ship docked right beside the massive battleship, the USS Arizona. His days were filled with the routine of naval life, maintenance, drills, and keeping things in order. He didn't expect to be part of history. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't a commander. He was simply a man doing his job. But life doesn't always choose heroes based on their uniform or rank. Sometimes it chooses them in a single, unexpected moment. And for Joe George, that moment was about to arrive on a quiet Sunday morning in paradise. On the morning of December 7th, Pearl Harbor was thrown into sudden and devastating chaos. The surprise attack shattered the peace. The Navy Yard became a scene of complete confusion. Ships were being torn apart by explosions. Fires broke out and alarms blared across the water. Amid this hellscape, the crew of the Vestal struggled to secure their ship. The Arizona, moored right beside them, had suffered catastrophic damage from a direct bomb hit. It was burning fiercely and rapidly becoming unsafe. A senior officer on the Vestal gave a direct order: cut the lines connecting them to the Arizona. It was a necessary command, a standard procedure to save their own ship from being pulled down or engulfed in the flames. But as the crew prepared to obey, Joseph George saw something that made him stop in his tracks. High on the burning, tilting deck of the Arizona, 6 sailors were stranded. They were injured, exhausted, and completely cut off from any escape. The fires were spreading, the ship was sinking, and time was running out. If the Vestal pulled away, those men had no chance of survival. In that split second, Joe George made a decision that went against orders but moved toward humanity. He grabbed a heavy, heaving line, a weighted rope, and threw it across the gap between the 2 ships. He missed. He tried again and again. Finally, after several desperate throws, one of the stranded crewmen caught it. Using that single rope, they painstakingly pulled themselves, hand over hand, across the dangerous gap to the safety of the Vestal's deck. All 6 survived because one man refused to walk away. You would think such an act of raw courage would be rewarded immediately, celebrated as a shining example of bravery under fire. But instead, Joe George's name faded from the official reports. Because he had not followed a direct order, his act of heroism was never formally recognized. There was no medal, no citation, no mention in the history books. He retired from the Navy years later, a quiet man who never boasted about his actions. He never told the full story, never sought the honor he so clearly deserved. Even his own family didn't know the details of what he'd done that day. For decades, the world remembered the event, the tragic loss of the Arizona, but it forgot the man who saved 6 lives from that very ship. His story was lost in silence, but the 6 men he rescued never forgot. Their memories of that terrifying morning and of the anonymous sailor who threw them a lifeline remained vivid. 2 of them in particular, Donald Stratton and Lauren Bruner, spent a lifetime wondering who that sailor was. They owed their lives to him, yet they didn't even know his name. In the early 2000s, after years of searching through records and speaking with other survivors, they finally discovered his identity: Joseph Leon George. But by then, he had already passed away in 1996. Still, the survivors and his family refused to let history ignore him. They were determined to see him get the recognition he was denied. They began a new fight not on a battlefield, but on paper. They wrote letters to anyone who would listen, collected sworn testimonies from witnesses, and took their case to lawmakers and high-ranking Navy officials. They meticulously pieced together the evidence, proving that Joe George's actions were the sole reason those 6 men survived. It was a long, slow process, but they pushed forward year after year. Slowly, support for their cause grew. The evidence became so overwhelming that it was impossible to ignore. And finally, the Navy prepared to correct a long-standing injustice. On December 7, 2017, exactly 76 years after the attack, the United States Navy officially honored Joseph George. At a solemn ceremony held on a boat floating above the submerged USS Arizona Memorial, his daughter Joanne was presented with the Bronze Star Medal for Valor on his behalf. 2 of the men he had saved, Donald Stratton and Lauren Bruner, were there to witness it. Now elderly men, their faces were filled with gratitude and relief. Their mission was finally complete. Their hero, the quiet sailor who defied an order to save their lives, finally had his name etched into the history books. Stories like Joe George's remind us that true heroism is often quiet, unrecorded, and easily forgotten. It's found in the choices of ordinary people during extraordinary moments. If you want more stories of unsung heroes whose courage shaped history, make sure to subscribe. Together, we can keep these important stories alive. Thanks for watching.